Yeah.
Let's talk about it, because this is this phone thing, and I think it's sort of like it runs through so much of education right now, and sometimes it's addressed, or sometimes it's surfaced, but a lot of times it's kind of like it's a little bit of this weird like
For sure.
wallpaper that's like
I would
background,
say it's
but
like
really
100 times more dangerous, like addiction to social media than addiction to drugs are, especially in the community that I teach in.
Mhm.
We haven't criminalized anybody for this addiction, which I think is a little bit, which is makes it a very different way in how we
But
address it.
to
Um,
be competing
but
with
yeah,
like multi-billion-dollar companies that have figured out like our psychology of attention and like that, I feel like, damn, like I don't know if I could win that fight.
everybody loves to say history repeats rhymes or whatever it does. Like, and I think it does that because we don't understand how our own
Mindset stuff, and
brains
really like
work. And
it
I
was
think it would
both,
be
it like gave me some language to recognize this struggle that so many of my students have, which is like it's not
relationships were a part of every teacher was good at them, every teacher valued them, and we learned from
dynamic
each
and
other in doing
interesting.
that.
And
Yeah.
I love telling this because a kid walked into the classroom, like the first kid that walked in, and he just goes, this fucking room smells like sex. And the kids just lost it. Like everybody went crazy.
This whole Black Lives Matter movement was just budding at the time. um, where do you think we're at now?
Like it's never gonna be just like a flip. There's always a battle. Like
I always wondered how it must be difficult to teach kids that when that was what they lived, and also you got to be mindful that you got to do it in some kind of way that empowers them to be a part of some
or
kind of
try
change.
to show
Get them
kids not
wanting.
just like
How'd you
here's some fucked up things that happen, but like what are the systems underneath? Cool.
welcome Ben Rosen, my colleague for 3 years at Cat High School in San Francisco. I think you had been at Cat before I got there and you were there after I left, but I started in fall of 2013 and left in the spring of 2016, I believe.
Yeah.
And been doing these interviews just to like, it's just a fun conversation to have. You record it, I get to watch it, I get to see who I am through other people's eyes a little bit, and I get to catch up with people. So I appreciate you for doing it. First thing I'd like to ask you is, what, what have you been? Where are you now?
Yeah. Right now I'm in Oakland. Um, but yeah, no, I'm happy to be chatting with you. I've watched some of the other ones and thought it was a really cool idea. And I love connecting with former students and colleagues, and especially like I think Cat has some a lot of gravity that people orbit around in a really good way, as we've gone different places. So that's really cool. Um, I I guess I was at Cat from 2008-9, I think was the year that I started. And then I think 4 years ago, I left and went to tried out New York City. Um, and oh man, it was a disaster. I grew up in New York, but not in the city, and New York City schools. And I was at a school that was actually, it had like social justice in the title, and it like had a vibe on paper that I thought would be kind of similar in some ways to Cat, or but it was a really sad place with a lot of people really checked out, and not a lot of structures, not a lot of like no community whatsoever, or hardly any. A lot of couple little pockets of people doing that themselves, but not like as a school. It didn't feel that way, and I was just I was really checked out and frustrated there, and so decided and realized like the Bay Area is kind of my home away from home. Even though I didn't grow up here, really like I feel really connected to it. And I came back and was lucky enough to through a Cat connection, Trevor Gardner, um, find a position at Arise teaching English, which I have not done before. Even though I did for a semester. I'm like technically certified as an English teacher, but this has been my first run at that. Yeah.
And is it your second year at Arise?
Yeah.
Or and what grades do you teach?
I'm doing 10th grade now, mostly with like an elective, so a nature elective, that's pretty mixed. But you know, it's a rough year. This is ready to put this one behind us.
And
Yeah,
so, like in New York, like I wanted to make a joke where I said like you went to New York to see if you could hack it, but you couldn't.
I
But then
couldn't.
it's yeah, you couldn't. But I guess it sounds like they couldn't hack it there either. But there's
Yeah.
like you can say social justice a lot of times, but like a lot of times there's a system. Like in New York, are there kids like tied to being prepared for the test, being prepared for college, like the whole college admissions process, or
Yeah, the
um,
the testing regimen there is like insane. You know, you have to pass these regents exams to graduate, and so there's a lot of pressure that, you know, social justice all sort of boils down to like getting kids to pass this test. And there's like, you know, there's an element of that I agree with for sure, but like it became kind of everything, and it's really sad. Like I was mostly working with actually new arrivals to the country, a huge, really big Dominican population. A lot of them barely spoke or just were learning to speak English, and they like kind of throw them in the class, you know, a lot of times in the middle of the year, and then they still like expect these kids to take the regents exams. And so it's just it's a you know, it's a lose-lose kind of deal.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's a hot mess. That happens a little like from not from the Dominican, but we get newcomers at my school, I think, and
Oh yeah.
we're not trained to we don't have a newcomer program really that addresses their needs. It's hard to see.
Yeah.
So at Arise is in Fruitvale,
Yeah. Yeah, right at the BART
and
station.
okay, so your students are predominantly uh, Latinx.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. Like I think 95%. Um, yeah, it's in some ways it's a pretty similar. In some ways, it's similar to how to Cat, a little less diverse probably. But yeah, a large Latino community from the, you know, in the Fruitvale. Um, it's great. It's a great school. Like I feel really lucky. I've definitely had some good leaders. I was watching, you know, Daniel, your interview with Daniel. I thought it was great. I really loved working with Daniel. Um, and but you know, we have great leaders at Arise, and it just feels like people like want to do what's right for kids, and if you got ideas or if you want to do something big or different, it's like, yeah, let's do it. That's why I'm doing all this, like trying to start a nature program essentially, and like a backpacking program at the school, and I'm just getting a ton of support. It's really cool. I've sort of like shifted in some ways. Like at CAT, I was much more the social justice or like more protest, like no, like that. It's like the thing I did. And here, maybe because I'm teaching English, it's a little different. But I'm like sort of the nature guy.
The
Um,
wilderness guy.
yeah, which is
Well,
kind of
that's dope. I mean, that's an experience. I don't know what it's like at your student. When I taught in East Oakland when I started, and we took our kids camping, I remember, and like the first night, they were just like, it was back when we had pay phones, and like they were just kind of like huddled around the payphone, trying to
yeah.
call whoever would answer,
Oh
collect
my
as many
god.
quarters. But then, and they were scared, like you could feel it, and they just hadn't had that experience. By the end of the weekend, it was like it was pretty powerful. Like
Yeah.
um,
Did you have those kind of experiences growing up?
Um, not structured into school as much.
Yeah.
Like I think it is something that you grow up in a suburb and you just kind of take for granted. Like we didn't camp as a family as a ton. I think
Yeah.
I was a Boy Scout for 1 year, and like I didn't get I wasn't that wasn't my scene, but I did learn a lot from it. Definitely had a lot more opportunities to venture out into the wilderness than your typical kid growing up in any city does.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean that's like I feel really lucky. I had a lot of those opportunities like growing up, and they were really formative for me. And I feel like, I mean, it's a little bit connected to what we were talking about with the technology being so just in front of kids all the time, and really like I think it's really warping like how they think, how they see themselves, all sorts of really deep things. And if they could, to get kids to be able to like disconnect is a huge goal for me right now. Like we would, in the nature walks that we were doing last year, to get on the van you had to give me your cell phone. And it was like, we'll take you out of school, you know, we'll take you out the last couple of periods of the day, we'll go up into the hills, we'll chill with the redwoods. But like, yeah, give me your phone. Like, we're not going to sit up there and be, you know, scrolling or whatever. And there was like tiny bit of pushback, but mostly the kids, like once they're out there, they're, you know, like anybody, it's like, it's nice.
Yeah, yeah.
You know?
I mean, it's the same way with me too. Even when I sit on my sofa and try to watch a movie, I'll be
Yeah.
going on Instagram and everything. And as soon
Yeah.
as if I like leave the phone where I can't touch it, I'll enjoy the movie better.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Let's talk about that, because this is this phone thing, and I think it's sort of like it runs through so much of education right now, and sometimes it's addressed, or sometimes it's, you know, surfaced, but a lot of times it's kind of like it's a little bit of this weird like wallpaper that's like background, but really it's really intense. It's really like I feel like it's at the level of like a serious emergency, you know, like if you recognize that 95% of our students were like taking a drug that made them like less connected to themselves, made them like more anxious, more depressed, like kept them from seeing their friends, like we would like, you know, all hands on deck. But like this is something where we all do it, and we're all, you know, we're all
yeah,
sort of like struggling with the addiction on one level. So it just kind of is like, oh yeah, like let's try to
for
engage.
sure. I would
Yeah.
say it's like 100 times more dangerous, like addiction to social media than addiction to drugs are, especially in the community that I teach in.
Hmm.
We haven't criminalized anybody for this addiction, which I think is a little bit, which is makes it a very different way in how we address it. Um, but yeah, I so I feel a little bit conflicted because, you know, a lot of teachers want to take their cell phones from them when they come into the room. And my opinion is like, I want them to have basically the same rules that adults have. Like if I'm in a meeting and there's a break for a second, I do check my phone. And
Yeah.
I think a lot of, and I think a lot of kids are responsible enough to know how to do that, and they don't let it get in the way of my instruction. And then there are kids that can't regulate like that. So it's, yeah, there's no easy, I don't know if what I'm doing is the right thing or the wrong thing.
Yeah, it's really hard. Like I'm more on the side of like, let's take them all. And in the framing of like, we're giving you a gift, you know, like this is something that you can't quite regulate yourself yet. And like, we're going to give you this gift of like, you know, wasn't that long ago where people had to kind of, this isn't like ancient history. People can function without them, you know? And I just like, you know, it's been almost 20 years that like I've been in the classroom, and I've seen, like I used to be able to compete with like a couple kids texting under the table, you know, like I feel like I'm a confident or strong enough teacher where like I could compete with some distractions and expect that, and like I could still hold a class. But to be competing with like multi-billion-dollar companies that have figured out like our psychology of attention and like that, I feel like, damn, like I don't know if I could win that fight, you know. I want to like I want to be there, you know, put on the show and be able to teach and engage, but you know, it's a challenge. And I've been thinking about it more broadly in society, you know, for all of us. It's something I you know, like you said, watching things and getting kind of hooked. I'm trying to read about it and understand what it's actually doing to our brains, you know. Yeah.
And I think that whole thing you said about the marketers and advertisers understanding how our brains work and them exploiting it is an interesting topic to me. Like everybody loves to say history repeats or rhymes or whatever it does. Like, and I think it does that because we don't understand how our own
Mhm.
brains work. And I think it would be beneficial, like if we were restructuring schools, what are the things we should absolutely be teaching? Maybe in every class, it's about like psychology and how does your brain work and how do advertisers manipulate that. Um,
Yeah.
and then the other thing I think is why history repeats is that we don't go back and visit our uncomfortable history. Like we just kind of like
Yeah.
either ignore it or dismiss it a lot of times.
Yeah, those like it reminds me of, I think at CAT we were starting to do this and did a good job of like talking about growth mindset, and trying to get kids to understand that, because it's yeah, I mean, I think the more I teach, or the more I've been in the classroom, I realize, it's less and less about any particular content that I'm teaching, and so much more about like how kids see themselves, or how they're curious about the world, or um, able to learn or think critically, right? Versus like um, just knowing a few things happened that were fucked up. Um, yeah, I've been thinking about that a lot, and I think I did lean more on the like at CAT and another before that too, just like let's learn about um more of like the content, like my buy-in or my hook was like the content, versus like figuring ways to make them, students themselves, the subject, or understand themselves, um so
I what I was thinking, it kind of like, since where I'm teaching now is an affluent suburban high school, and it's a lot more like the school I went to. So it's been sort of an interesting, both in Oakland and San Francisco. I learned so much that I had been sheltered from my whole
yeah.
life. Um, and as when you say the growth mindset, I have this newfound lens after, well, Trevor and my friend Tim, who's your friend now too, have this book called Leading in the Belly of the Beast. Actually, I
The
can,
plug, like,
I can,
you
yeah,
know.
there it is. There it is. And it's good. And they talk about the system, how the system designed to fail. And that is a powerful idea to me. System is set up, is not um, broken. It's doing what it's supposed to do. And I think of how do ways this like I played a part in that. With the growth mindset, I definitely think that we can say it all that we want, but like ever since I got a good SAT score in math, I believed I was superior. Like I went through an environment that fed me messages that I was kind of superior, and that was some kind of innate ability.
Yeah.
And I think that when we were always talking about the growth mindset, there was a part of me that was like, we we haven't started from the beginning yet. Like I feel like, yeah, like we're just always operating in the we're we've been operating at a time of the fixed mindset. Like, and I think there's a lot of things I think about, like we're moving from this industrial age into this information age, or right in theoretically, but I think we're coming from a place where we believe everybody has an innate skill set. And I think when you talk about systemic racism, and I think about how I contributed to it and how I had to unlearn everything I learned when I started teaching in Oakland, a lot of it was from that like um, numeric score that I attached to myself.
Yeah, and then potentially like, I mean, I think maybe this is what you're saying, like projecting that as like the path on our kids, right? Who are maybe that's are coming from a different place, and haven't been told how much smarter than everyone else they are, how great they are, from whenever. Yeah,
Yeah.
we read a book together, some of the teachers, all about like dependent and independent learners, and it overlaps a lot with this growth mindset stuff, and it really like it was both, it like gave me some language to recognize this struggle that so many of my students have, which is like, it's not that they can't learn, it's the barrier to like beginning that process, there's so many things in the way, whether it's their own like self-doubt or, the actual, lack of resources in a classroom or school. Um, but yeah, there's so many things there that keep them um, from having, like, when you look at the kind of education and curiosity that is like encouraged among kids in more elite schools, it's like it's so night and day, right? A lot of that stuff doesn't happen for the students that we teach, I think. Not positive, but like a lot of it is in the high schools that are trying to maybe I shouldn't say that. There's like great middle school and elementary teachers trying to do great things. I know. But it's heavy when you have 10th graders or even seniors, who I've taught, who are like, the resistance to picking up the pencil is so much heavier than, whatever, like what the skill gap happens to be. Like, anyway, and the hopeful side is that, like, if you could break that barrier, if you could give kids the whether it's encouragement or confidence or whatever it is for any one individual, it's like they could learn. People could teach themselves and be lifelong learners, right? I'm not, we're not there to like support them after. We gotta,
Yeah, and I
hire.
think what I notice about the system in Pleasanton is that like it's just evolved so to be it's so content driven that
Mhm.
yes, these kids are really good at learning what we've become hyper focused on measuring, which I don't think is always the most important stuff. I mean, I I think I don't think you need to know all the dates these kids are remembering or all the definitions of parts of the cell or whatever. And I do think it comes at the, what I see is the system has sort of evolved so that there's no way for the kids we taught at CAT to catch up um, to these to what's happening in Pleasanton, but also the kids in Pleasanton are in some sense suffering. I mean, like it's hard to have sympathy for kids that have like a water polo team and a marching band and all this kind of stuff. But like we talk about mental health all the time, and like um, there's enormous pressure to always be doing something to look good on a piece of paper, and it
Right.
stunts their development. And like people don't have. I don't think people are very good at giving and receiving criticism, for example. And I don't think people are good at adapting to environments that is not their comfort zone. Um, and I do think our kids at CAT were way better at those things, and they're like realistically, in my mind, because I studied economics, I'm like, there should be some way that like that is some in some way marketable, like, and maybe it already is. Like if you go into the Apple store, like maybe you do see more kids from CAT than you do Pleasanton working because they can communicate on multiple
Yeah.
levels. But I still think college becomes this self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah. That's interesting. Yeah. Well, I mean, this is some of the stuff I loved the interview you did with Chris. And I think some of that stuff came up, right? Like some of these skill gaps and also just like different ways. They were very prepared and learned a lot of really heady things and presentations and the communication and all that. But yeah, like not recognized. I think that's the heart. It's not even like the gap. It's like not being aware of that, not being self-conscious of what is sort of out there, and not having things to like to measure. And I don't know, maybe I would hedge that. Like, I don't think that the point is for kids to like be in competition constantly with each other. um but I do think, it's relevant, like, to know sort of like where your growth is or your strengths, and um yeah, I've struggled with that. We're coming up, against that in different ways at Arise. I think it's similar, where like we do really cool projects, and like kids are learning some really deep stuff, and they're able to speak about really important topics that they care about. And then also we're struggling with, like, writing. Just like academic general writing is like a huge struggle for so many kids, because been sort of like drilled with the like, you know, noun, verb, independent, whatever, you know, like let's get into all that. Um, and at this, you
and
know, go ahead.
you battle between, you want first for a kid to have a positive self-image, right? Like, so you like, that's the first thing, and then you also want to hold them to high standards. And there's all these different, you know, is it, do I want them to know every, in English it's probably grammar or whatever, you know, these things that probably aren't important to you, but when they get to college they are competing with, you know, kids that come from Pleasanton. And that's the thing that I think is, especially in math, that I feel the Crest interview, definitely I feel like I regret that I wasn't that hard of a teacher, you know,
Yeah.
and a lot of my kids needed me to be harder.
Yeah.
But
Well,
it
but
is,
yeah. And then on the flip side, though, I think you do actually need to be a different kind of teacher. Like when you're dealing with kids that have been, you know, marginalized and haven't been given the resources and have been neglected in a lot of different ways in the educational system, like you do have to figure out and spend more time on, yeah, it's relationships, you know, like we say this all the time. It's not a gimmick, it's just like real.
yeah.
It's we're humans, you know. We got to have those relationships to be able to, you know, to learn. I feel like that was a really powerful part of, you know, to bring it back to Kat, where we have this connection. Like, I mean, I feel like just really lucky that, you know, when I go and like walk through the Mission almost any time, like having taught there for a while, like I'll get, hey Ben, what's up, you know. I don't always recognize, like someone this happened a couple of years ago where someone, you know, I was like, oh damn, like like I didn't recognize them at first because they, you know, I taught them when they were 11th or 12th grade, and then all of a sudden they were like this like much larger man, like grown adult. I was like, oh shit, you know. But we had a really nice chat, and I've it's like it's so like fulfilling to see what my former students are up to, and just to like be connected, and other teachers from there. I think it's really special. Like, you know, I taught at a school before Cat, and then now two after. I think Arise is doing something very similar, but it's not, you know, it doesn't just naturally happen. Like, you know, there are schools where there's a lot of tension between, I mean, I felt this in New York, like there was some real tension between the students and the staff. Like I saw like teachers, a teacher like, you know, sort of like posturing, like physically, like against kids, you know, because it was sort of like just like it was just a bad bad dynamic. uh,
Really,
yeah.
that's like, that's just how people interact in New York, you
Yeah,
know.
I guess so, I guess so,
No,
yeah.
that's messed up. But I do think Cat was very unique, that we had all, like, maybe not all, I mean, like, I remember teachers that emphasize relationships, and it wasn't, you know, sometimes you just talk about things but don't actually do them, but it did seem like relationships were a part of every teacher was good at them, every teacher valued them, and we learned from each other in doing that.
Yeah.
um, and I wonder if part of, you know, like, I would say that about the school I taught at in Oakland, but it was part of the district. That school was closed down. There was a lot of toxicity that came from um, stuff that was out of our hands, but still we felt. And I think that was partly being in a small school in East Oakland that the district was talking about shutting down for 3 years. But
Yeah.
what's your impression on like the whole like advantages of charter schools? You feel like there is a, they offer an opportunity to innovate? Um,
Yeah. It's funny. I mean, I think like on a whole, in some ways, I think they're really problematic, even though I spent most of now my career teaching at one. I think the ones that I've taught at are, you know, they're local, sort of independently run in a lot of ways. I think the bigger problem is the ones that have like, you know, the boards with corporate donors and sponsorship and that kind of stuff. I think that's where the problem is. But I don't think there's anything wrong with like, you know, we did the defense, like having kids do the defenses for as a graduation requirement, or like internships, and having the freedom to do that kind of stuff was like, I think really special for kids, and that you don't get that in just a general public education setting. So I feel really lucky to have been a part of some of that stuff. And um, back to the relationships thing. I mean, I think that's like also, um, it has to really be built. You have to have like leaders that provide the setting for it. Like I was lucky when I came into CAT. I had I had a really rough like first 2 years. But I had a lot of support. There were like incredible teachers who were there. Allison was an awesome principal. Trevor was doing like really cool stuff. Like I had all these like teachers to look up to. Um, Tom and Paul, and like these people were doing like awesome projects and stuff. And I remember even like, I wonder if like, I mean, this is one of those things I think kids sometimes take for granted or don't think about, like the behind the scenes stuff, right? But like, I remember one of the years, like before we got our advisory, like having a list of kids and having like a whole set time for teachers who had taught those kids before to give little pieces of like, oh, like, this kid's into like, this kid's kind of into gaming. If you're into that, like, that's like his hook, or like this kid, it's something else, right? But those things, you have to like actually set that process up. Um, this is a kid that like, and actually even recognizing, I remember it was really powerful, like, because at the end you would also realize like, here's 5 kids that like maybe never made a connection with any teacher last year. So like, we gotta like, what are we gonna do to, re-engage or, bring these kids in? I think that's like at Arise, one of and Trevor actually started this with his brother, I think way before Arise, but like taking kids up to Ukiah as a bonding, kind of experience. And it's like really loose. Like there's not much that happens there other than like hanging out and not having the cell phones. And it's a beautiful thing. I formed better connections with some kids over a weekend there than 4 or 5 months in the classroom. So I'm all for it.
Yeah, and I was thinking how you also have to model whatever you want to see. You have to model, and we did model the relationship building, the commitment to each other before the commitment to our content. I think at CAT, I remember the first thing we did when I came there was we did some kind of an overnight at what is it, the Marin Headlands.
Yeah, right.
But it's interesting to hear your, because my introduction was different, I think, because I had been teaching for 5 years. I sort of knew who I was in front of a group of students, and I didn't really need. And I was also given a class where like there just weren't behavior issues. Like the kids, it was amazing. Like I loved that first
Yeah.
year I spent there. I was supported in so many ways by my students. I had one class to teach pre-calculus. I could,
Right.
but I feel like then that whole experience also did give me this lens. Like I talk about insider versus outsider a lot of times. Like in Pleasanton, I look for all the different ways I can get into the conversations about race and identity and systemic racism. Insider and outsider is one thing. And like, I remember forming a bond with the senior teachers real quick because we all worked together, and that was an awesome team.
Yeah.
And but then still it was like they're like people like Ty, for example, and Matt. Like I feel like I've gotten to know them better after I left and when I was there. Like I feel like there was a little bit of like sometimes it's hard to when you come into a community that's that strong. I guess we were all on our grade level teams. Like takes a while before you feel like you're in the middle of it.
Yeah. It was really, I mean, yeah, that was a solid year. I remember something like, I mean, I'm glad you had an easy transition to CAT, because I had been teaching for 5 years before also, and I got like put through the ringer, man, like I felt like I hadn't taught a day before when I first showed up there.
What grade did you teach?
I taught 11th and 12th my first couple of years. I stayed mostly with 11th and 12th.
So my theory, part of my theory why, because I was used to the first year you teach in a community where the system hasn't benefited them, they make sure that you're someone they can trust before they. And
Oh yeah,
there was a little bit of that, but also that year was when the Metro and the Cat kids were
right.
combined. So
Hmm.
I sort of think when I look back on it and think, why didn't they put me through it like that? Maybe a tiny part of it was because I knew who I was, but most of it was because they were uncomfortable with some of the other kids in the class already.
Right. They were able to like lean on you a little more than otherwise. Yeah.
But that's the thing I think about a lot. Like I feel like I didn't get into this conversation with Tim as much, but I was thinking about this. Like there's you sort of think about it's probably unfair to sort of simplify it down, but like there's two cultures, like a culture of power or privilege, and then the culture that isn't part of that. Like that culture that we taught in, like, is going to be very discerning of outsiders coming in, thinking that they have solutions for them. And I feel like that's why the kids get this hard energy where they're tough, and you grow up in a white suburb like I did, you're
Yeah.
not used to it.
Yeah.
um that's a very difficult feeling, but to me it makes sense. Like you probably have people trying to sell them shit they don't need, or solve their problems. And um
Yeah. Well, it's like, yeah, it's the trust, and it's like the learning has to go both ways, right? And we got to be willing to listen and understand. I mean, I was pretty naive like my first, couple years, I think, at CAT, and just in general about um, being a pretty privileged white dude, like hopping into a school uh, of mostly Latino and Black students, and I think on like a human level, I like to think I'm able to, just connect and form those bonds and stuff. But like, I was definitely not prepared in a lot of ways, and they sensed that, the nervousness, and I mean, you talked about that a little bit in one of the other interviews. Like, I like my first day, I remember like I had so many big plans for my first day at a CAT, like what I was gonna do, and this lesson was like super dynamic and interesting. And I love telling this because a kid walked into the classroom, like the first kid that walked in, and he just goes, "This fucking room smells like sex." And the kids just lost it, like everybody went crazy. And I felt like I didn't get them back for like another 6 months. Like it was like that kind of thing where like every day I was just like battling, to get to be heard. And then and then it's the thing, it's like, oh yeah, I gotta listen a little bit, and differentiate myself somewhat and figure out what am I actually doing here, um and then something really different clicked. Like my third year there, it was like a night and day, and all of a sudden I was like, this is great. I could like have some more of those connections, and I could like teach this radical content, and kids are listening this time, like holy shit. um but yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think like, I mean, we talked about this or mentioned this. I think this concept of like growing as an educator is just it is what it means to be an educator, I think, and we sort of like, I was thinking it's a little bit of this paradox, but like, I've been teaching for a while, and on one hand, there's a lot of days where I'm like, nothing is going to surprise me. I've been there, done that. Like I get it, like I got it, right? And at the exact same time, it's like every single day, it's like, oh damn, like how do I do that? Like how could I do this different? Or so I think that's like the fun part about teaching. It's like no matter
yeah,
how long you've been doing it, you got to get better every day, like, or every year, Yeah.
yeah, and it's easier to talk about what we teach, I think, but how we teach or the energy we project and the relationships we build, all that kind of stuff is harder. But that's, you made me think of that because I remember in my first year there, I think I was doing like the national boards or whatever, but I had to watch myself on tape, and that's an awkward
Yeah,
process.
yeah,
And
yeah.
I just remember coming to terms with like, oh, I thought I sound like Denzel Washington and I
Yeah.
sound more like Peter
You're
Griffin or something
you're
like
just this
that.
nervous white guy like
Yeah,
pacing around the room, right?
yeah.
Yeah,
But I do think that's what I've gained from these conversations is the same thing. It's like I've gotten over that, like, I don't like to look at myself thing. And now
yeah.
I'm more aware of what I project. I think it's interesting to talk about how much has changed since we started teaching together, because we talked about social media already, right? Like,
Mhm.
and its micro level impact, like the impact on the students. And also 2013, I think, was when Trayvon Martin was murdered, and 2014 was when Michael Brown was murdered, and this whole Black Lives Matter movement was just budding at the time. Um, where do you think we're at now?
Man, it's so like it's just such a it's making me just think about like how change is like it's so hard to delineate, while you're in it. um when you look back at it, it's like obvious. And I sometimes, I like use the example of when you study the Civil War. I was a history teacher, so I had to like geek out on this. Like you learn, and it's sort of like conventional wisdom that there's these like five events, like Uncle Tom's Cabin was written, Bleeding Kansas, the Fugitive Slave Act. Like these are the five sequence, that led to the Civil War. And but then when you look at those things, like they were like 7, 8, 10 years apart, all of those things happening. Right. And there's like sort of a way that we assume all these things, like just sort of everyone knew they were going that way. And I like to think of like, yeah, there's sort of been these upsurges and then things calm down. But I like to hope that when we, there will be a more larger scale change, and we'll be able to look back and be like, Oscar Grant being killed was an inflection point that, yeah, it didn't lead directly to the revolution or whatever it is that's a larger change, but or the, like you're saying, the Black Lives Matter movement is clearly like a galvanizing moment, right? Even though if you look at it, like where's all the protests, like at any given time you could sort of be like really excited or be really demoralized. And I think it's more about like what are those structures or things that are being laid, the groundworks that are being laid to make these changes. And it's so, I think the other thing is like it's never going to be just like a flip. There's always a battle, like as much as there's been gains for different groups, like there's the backlash, there's the Trump trying to put people back in their place, and those forces. um so I'm sort of like, I'm in some ways like intellectually optimistic, and sometimes, personally I get like more discouraged or feel kind of frustrated that things, given how dire the situation that we're in is as a planet, humanity, like it's no joke. It's not just like some small things, like literally life, on the planet and our environment is at stake. And then obviously the brutal, the racism resurfacing, to counter some of the, perceived gains, is really, it's there. It ain't going away. It's got to be fought. I take a little bit of a different approach to fighting it now than I think I did even while I was at CAT. But I don't know. What do you think? Where's your like the,
I mean, yeah, I think it's complex, right? Like everybody wants social media to be all bad or all good, and I think it's complex. I definitely think that where we're at today is a result of people whose voices we used to be able to marginalize, we could no longer sweep it under the rug. And I think social media has given a voice. And I think probably in the 1960s, you could say it was the color television and the news that like showed things that people wanted to ignore, and the automobile that allowed people to organize in ways they couldn't before. And I think in this past decade, it's been more social media. And I think that it's also been, to me, strategic, through Hollywood. Like I feel like most, um, like black movies or dramas that I've watched, there always is a message about police brutality in there.
Mhm.
And I think that systemic racism, you know, like it's, remember when you had the Occupy Wall Street thing and everybody was like, they don't have, there's not, like, what are you supposed to do? The problem is wealth disparity. Well, what do you do about wealth disparity? But I think that Black Lives Matter was, and not just, I think Black Lives Matter is moving in this tide that brought everything to address systemic racism by focusing on one issue, that issue being, police brutality, specifically killing of young Black men. And I do feel like we're at a different point. Like after last summer, like I feel like you and I talked about, we thought we needed a revolution, like a certified revolution. And I still worry that we're not, we're like one, as a teacher, I don't really want to talk about police brutality with my teacher friends as much as I want to talk about education, because that's what we have, what we're empowered to change. um I do think policing is, um bad institutionally, and I think so is teaching, um like in ways that we need to address. Where I think, I wonder if we're as far, like I think when I started teaching, I didn't know, I was a fish in water, you know, the water of white supremacy. Like you don't really understand what that culture is. Like I started to get more acquainted with what that is, and I'm still not sure in the mainstream. I think we're more comfortable acknowledging that systemic racism exists, but I'm not sure we've made that much progress in talking about whiteness in ourselves and our own identity.
Yeah, yeah, I'd agree with that. I mean, it's like, well, no, I'll leave that there with you.
Um, all right.
Yeah, no, I mean, things so much. It's insane how much things have stayed the same. You know, again, back to the historical piece. There's a way of just, you sort of like assume like history progresses and we're like modernizing and things are just getting better, right? And there's ways you could look at police violence as being one of them, where like it's very similar, right? Or the way that um yeah, some of these aspects of racism through institutions are still as blatant and as present. But there's definitely more of like a language and a culture emerging, especially from the youth, you know, which is where it should be, that has sort of a language to speak to these things and you know, call it out, fight it. I think there's a little bit of a like too much, sometimes superficial, like call out as like the work,
Mhm.
versus trying to bring people into this, you know.
Yeah,
Yeah,
there's a huge generational divide, and I
yeah,
think that needs to be addressed. Like I
yeah,
think there's a lot of, I don't want to make blanket statements about a whole generation, but a lot of like millennials that
go
think
for
that
it.
that they're the first generation to know that racism existed or something.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
how do you? So here's a question I always wondered about, because I feel like this, you're in this position where you taught a very radical curriculum to our students in San Francisco who were the targets of institutionalized racism, I think.
Mhm.
And I think I always wondered how it must be difficult to teach kids that when that was what they lived. And also you got to be mindful that you got to do it in some kind of way that empowers them to be a part of some kind of change, if they
Yeah.
want to be. How did you balance those things?
Um, I mean, one, I don't always think I found the right balance for, I think I definitely focused a lot on, or tried to show kids not just like, here's some fucked up things that happen, but like, what are the systems underneath that are operating? Because it's true. I in no way could claim to understand what it's like to be policed or be, to be, followed through the mall or whatever, any number of ways that, micro or macro aggressions or harassment. But I think it does actually take study to understand like systems like capitalism and how white supremacy has revealed itself in different forms and has modified itself and molded under different circumstances. And I think it's really empowering for kids to understand like systems versus these are just like some messed up people, or like it's like some people are screwed up. Or so I always felt like, I think while I was at CAT, that was what I always sort of felt was the empowering piece, was like, this isn't you, it's not you, like it's not something that is just interpersonal. This is like deeply rooted in the foundation of our country. And I think when you understand that, it sort of frees you in some ways to address it. That being said, I think that I didn't give enough openness for students' own experiences to come in. I think I was coming with too much of a like, I got some shit to teach you, and like, listen up. And I think there's a place for that, like for myself or for anybody. A lot of times, like, people don't teach them, like, you need someone challenging you, like that's how we all, on some level. For me, it was in college, it was like the first professor that's like exposing you to some things that you didn't have access to. And it's like, oh damn. For me, it was Latin America. It was like, I never was taught like what the US did in Latin America, and then I was and it was like, oh, that's what the US is. So I never felt that bad about, like, I do think there's a place for, like, we have things to teach as as having had access to schooling and these things, but I definitely leaned too hard, and I would be critical of myself. Like, I think now I'm trying more what I said on the level of like, you gotta use those things, but really the kids have to be curious and engaged enough to learn it and figure it out themselves and take it up. And I think the I'm like, I think this, like, the vaccine, the controversy around the vaccine and the fear over the vaccine, some of which I've seen from some former students through like social media, has made me like really question, like, damn, like, I hope that's like, some of that's not, there's good reasons for people to be, have the fear or be concerned based on the country. But I think I sometimes taught a little too much, like, you know, just everything they do is fucked up. So, not having to like discern what's going on with, in this case, right? So you get to the vaccine thing and it's like, well, it's the US government, it's the US again, so it must be fucked up. And it's more complex than that. Yeah.
I feel like that's another, in addition to psychology or advertising, media literacy is definitely something we should be, and I don't think you can take that on your own shoulders. But
Thank you.
that is a good, honest response to that question. I appreciate that.
Yeah, and I've had some kids reach out actually, like, which I love, like on, private messages, like, yo, what do you think about this vaccine, man? Like, and I feel so honored that like a kid would, or former student would reach out like that. But I also am like, damn, like, we need this damn vaccine, y'all, come on. Like, yeah. It's that it's critical thinking versus just like, good guys and bad guys kind of stuff.
Yeah, I think it's hard when you, it's hard. It's especially hard with your content, but hard to balance that, like the world, there is like clearly a dominant side that's exerting its pressure in ways that students we taught and you're still teaching are constantly stressed about.
Yeah.
And then also giving them the tools to figure it out for themselves.
Oh, hey.
Hi, Jake.
Got company.
It's my mom's
This is my
phone.
roommate, Jake.
This is
Hey,
my
Jake.
mom's phone.
Wait,
All
all right. We're back rolling. I feel like this has been a good, like it's weird how I have to picture an audience watching us for us to connect like this and have a meaningful conversation, but I appreciate you for doing it.
Yeah. No, I appreciate being on it. I mean, like I said, I feel so lucky to have gone through and like through that cat mode of really, formed me as like a person and as an educator. Like all these teachers I mentioned, freaking Matt, and others that like, we're still all connected. It feels really precious, Sherry, all these, we did a thing like with some former students, like just a check-in at the beginning of the pandemic, and it was awesome. Like a bunch of kids showed up, and I just like, I love the idea that a couple kids might check it out or want to say hello and stay connected through it. So,
And I'd love to see student, like I'd love to watch another one of these things, like that two students or you and a student, like it definitely is a special community. And I think you appreciate something after you've stepped away from it for a while. It's been 5 years since I've left CAT. I'm
yeah,
starting to appreciate who I am is that, that community is a part of who I am today.
yeah, yeah. I guess we'll leave it there.
Do you have any final, I always ask for what words of wisdom, pearls of wisdom, nuggets of truth, eternal reflections.
Yeah, I mean, yikes, that's a big one to end with. I think I've just been thinking a lot about, for myself and for young people, the importance of, being more connected to the places that we live, and the natural world. And I think that just cuts through so many different things, of mental health to like our intellectual curiosity, and just being like fully human. I am giving a lot of like attention to that and trying to, bring others into it, and especially students. I think there's like a kernel of, the ways that people are revisiting. There's a lot of fucked up things in the world, but there's also some answers. There's people, indigenous peoples have been around for a long time and are still here. And, it's not like we have to recreate every solution, right? There's some lessons that are there for us. So
That's true.
that,
That's deep. There's beautiful art coming out of like every corner too, which I feel like is always reassuring. All right.
speaking of art, check out my art, follow my, Insta page, follow my
I wanted to, yeah.
shop, come hit me up.
I forgot that was another question I had swirling around is what are your, maybe we'll have to have, I feel like we already wrapped up, so I don't want to open up a whole new can of worms, but
Yeah.
Your art, I love your drawings.
Thanks.
Yeah, it looks like kind of productive outlet for you.
Awesome. Yeah, I love it. I want to do it with students or find a way to do it more. And I actually taught, this goes back to the phone thing. I sometimes do like little mini lessons on doodling because it drives me nuts that like kids don't doodle really anymore. I don't see a lot of it because the first distraction is like, on the phone. And so sometimes I've done like, here's like doodling 101, like, which has been fun.
What's your do you have an Instagram handle for when this goes viral that you want to get out there?
Yeah, sure. My Insta is b.rosen_. And I have an Etsy shop with some art prints that I'm looking to do some more of, which is Lines by Ben is my Etsy shop.
Limes.
Line lines like
Okay. Limes by Ben. Okay, that's dope. And B.Rosen _.
Yeah.
And then there's nothing after the underscore.
That's it. We just leave it hanging.
Wow. All right. That's unique.
That's teaching at that's the edge of the apocalypse, you know.
All right. I like it.
Circle.
Thanks, Ben.
All right. Thanks, Chuck. Good talk.
All right. Brigitte, I always used to do that. I had stopped doing this, but like I would always put some kind of awkward clip at the beginning, like to put me into my comfort zone.
Right.
And Regina would always say, like, as Regina said, you do like a lion face, and then like you chew
Right.
on a lemon. But I don't know if you have any like, yeah, awkward faces.
No. This is all I got. This is my
Oh, I thought that was, no, just kidding.
yeah.
All right, I feel comfortable now. We can start.